Welcome back, everyone, to this first episode in a while of Medicine Trails. I am here happily with my good brother, Steve. I am Alex. Welcome back, everyone, for joining us. And it's going to be an interesting show, I think, today, because we've got a subject that we've discussed about having be a topic on this show for a while. And there's a whole lot of information that comes with it, and that is Christianity. Christianity. This is not going to be your traditional Jesus show, if to put it lightly. But before we get into that, Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Alex. It's always a pleasure sitting down with you and just let the thoughts flow, I guess, in this case, and it doesn't hurt to let the viewers know, like most of our podcasts are pretty unprepared. We're not sitting here with sheets of paper and documents and pointers. It's more from the heart and just talking, and I like that. I'm excited, it's naturally flowing, free flowing, and see what comes through, right? Let the spirit kind of take over. As they say, since we're on the topic of Jesus, Jesus, take the wheel. So
Jesus, take the wheel, because I am drunk. You take the wheel. No. Well, yeah, absolutely. That is so true with all the information that we have in our minds about all this, because our brain and our mind is able to process and download information, some information processor, and our heart is really this generator of the field of energy. And I recently was thinking about this a lot, where sometimes we overthink things in life, and the heart really always has the knowing and the understanding of whether something is true or false, or yes, we're going to move towards this, or no, we need to move away from this. And this podcast has definitely been an endeavor to work from the heart. The mind can come second, and with all of this stuff about Christianity, I just to dive right into this, I was raised as a Roman Catholic in New York, and with all of the different denominations of Christianity, that was one of the things that really struck me. As it just didn't make sense to me as a young person. Like, why are there so many different versions of Christianity? And it as the years have gone on, start to find out that, well, it's because it's so very much integrated into what we consider to be modern history. I mean, just look at what year it is. What year is it? It's 2022. Well, 2022 years from what? From allegedly from the birth of Christ. There's a lot of different things that came from diving into this. I always consider myself very spiritual person, but didn't always jive with what they were telling me. This is the way of the world in Roman Catholic understanding. So I'm excited to dive into some history stuff, because Christianity there's a whole hidden chapter, to put it lightly, about Christianity that I think both of us have over the years have dived into. So, I mean, just put a question in your lap, Steve.
Yeah.
What is Christianity? What is Christianity in your interpretation of it?
I mean, that is a very loaded question. What is it? But I think, to put it very simple, and going from the New Testament, Christianity, the one phrase that encompasses all of Christianity, in my opinion, is love thy neighbor as you love thyself. It's unconditional love. The Old Testament was the testament of a vengeful God, and then Jesus came and he brought us the message of love, the forgiving God, the all-loving God, and both books, or both testaments, in my opinion, are valid, but the one supersedes the other. The Old Testament was valid during a certain time period, but then the new message came and it supersedes the old message. And there's even some beings that say that there will be a time when the third testament will come, you know, and I don't think we can fathom or comprehend what the third testament will be. But it is important to acknowledge the second one was a testament of love, you know, unconditional love. And in my opinion, this is Christianity. And, you know, you pointed out like your upbringing and my upbringing. My grandma was Black Catholic from Austria. So she was very intense. And I was in Switzerland, they call it reformiert, which is, I think, reformed is what the word would be here. And in Switzerland, you have to go to church till you're 16. It's like a requirement that you go every week. They have like groups for youth while you go to school, you go to church. And it was a very interesting experience, to say the least, you know, because you might be able to call me a maverick, a very independent thinker. And I was from a very early age on, like I always had issues in school because I couldn't really conform to authority. And I struggled greatly with somebody staying in front of the classroom, pretending to be the all-knowing teacher. And the same kind of happened in church. Like I didn't mind going to church, and my mom raised me to be spiritual, and I believed, and also had very personal experiences with the spirit world as a child, you know, like I was able to perceive things and see things when I was younger to an extent that might not be possible at the moment right now. Like I was connected, and I had my own personal experiences. But what I found in church was that we were pushed to blindly believe into something that there was no actual ways to confirm it or to experience in ourselves. And I think I spoke on that before, you know, like if you look between Christianity and their spiritual practices and like indigenous practices, in the indigenous ways, be it the Shake Tent, Sweat Lodge, Sundance, you have ways to go into the experience, or even fasting, you know, where you go and it's an intimate experience that you have with the creator, the helpers, the spirit world, and you come out renewed and refreshed because you had that experience, you know. It is something that you can take home or take to the bank, as they say, you know, you had that experience, it becomes a part of you. While at church, as a child, oftentimes I was sitting there and the priest would talk about all those things, but he didn't give us any tangible ways to go into it and experience it, you know. I mean, prayer is a way, but like even praying, there is no real, they don't teach you proper ways of praying, you know. Not saying that one way of praying is wrong and the other one is right, but they kind of let you hang in a limbo, you know. You got to pray to God. If you do it wrong, you go to hell. If you don't live your life right, you're going to hell. Like it was pretty much doom and gloom. And I even had experiences where I came to church once and the preacher told me I can't come to church wearing the clothes I was wearing. So it was kind of referring back to a judgmental God. So the young man I went home and I made myself a t-shirt with markers that says, God loves me the way I am. Like something like that. I kind of forgot, but I wrote in the front of the shirt, the back in the shirt. And the next time I went to church with that shirt, and I kind of made a statement, but also got in trouble for it, you know. And as much as I loved the priest that we had as a kid, later on, because I grew up in a small town in Switzerland. Later on, it came out that he actually had a mistress for a long time of his life and then left his wife because Reformed priests were able to marry, and moved in with his new girlfriend. And this again turned my worldview upside down, you know. You're constantly preached to about moral values and how you should conduct your life. But then you see the man that had in some sort spiritual authority over you, because lots of times human beings, we give this to priests, we give them superiority over us because we look at them as messengers of the creator, of God. But then you see that whatever he preached, he didn't live himself. So that again, you know, kind of stirred up a lot of things. And I've been a seeker all my life, but there has been certain moments, like for instance this one, that definitely drove me to go deeper, to search more. And I have a hard time accepting the truth that there was only one Son of God, because, I feel like we all are. And I will give the ball back to in your court again. But what I would like to speak upon at one point in this podcast is that I, with my whole being, believe that there was an agenda by the church, by the state, by the government, to take power away from us. They don't want us to know how powerful we are. They don't want us to know that we all are children of God. And even though we can get into this more later, Jesus obviously was a highly advanced human being. So advanced, and I would say, and maybe Christians don't like that, through numerous incarnations, worked on himself, perfected his old being, that at one point, he was able to embody Christ consciousness. And we need to separate those two, Jesus the man and Christ, because even in the Bible, there is moments, for instance, before they nailed him on the cross in the garden, when he was deceived, he said, God, why have you forsaken me? This is not Christ speaking. This is Jesus the man speaking. And many other times in the Bible, it was not Jesus the man speaking, it was Christ speaking through Jesus. And we need to know how to differentiate between the two. It is really important. But I feel like by us just blindly thinking that this man died for our sins, look the state we're in. It's been 2,000 years since Jesus was on earth. We can't use the excuse anymore that he died for our sins. We need to take our lives, our responsibilities in our own hands. And as he said, what the miracles I performed, you can do, and so much more. Why has nobody done it yet since then? Or, there have been, but there are many, many and far in between. Why, as human beings, are we so content to put all our burdens and everything, even our misdeeds, into Jesus's hands under the disguise that he died for our sins, so it's okay, And I'm very passionate about this, because even if you look, I saw so many people that are saying they're Christians. They live a horrendous life, conniving, cheating, greed. And once a week they go to church. What is the word? Confession. They confess, and we're good to go for another week of mediocre life, and we need to kind of like shake ourselves out of this state. But I also think it was done deliberately, But yeah, that was a little too passionate, maybe. But
hey, no, that's never too passionate on the Medicine Trails podcast, dude. You brought up a lot of interesting talking points here. Something that I want to speak to first is you mentioned there was you put these three kind of bodies that we consider to be separate bodies today. The church, the state, and the government. These are all ideas that, like, if you want to just break it down to the two, you got the church and the state. There's that famous separation of church and state thing. Well, we have to also really remember, and it's, of course, you think about it, we know it. If anyone has studied history remotely, we know that back 2,000 years ago, the idea of the separation of church and state was not a thing. When we're talking about the Roman Empire, and we talk about the earliest form of organized Christianity, this was even 400 plus years after the alleged death of Jesus, right? So the thing is, when the Gospels were really written and compiled, this was years later, after the events took place that inspired them. And that's, I think it's a perfect little time glimpse into how the game of telephone and time itself can distance us from the actual memory of something. Like, our memories are fallible a lot of times. We can have a spectrum, of course. Some people have really good memories, but even still, we tend to remember things through the filter of our perceptions, and our perceptions are not always accurate. So when we're talking about Christianity today, the question is that what Christianity was in the beginning? And I would say I'm very passionate about the conclusion I've come to is the answer is no. Christianity, as we think of it, and people practice it today, is nothing at all like what Christianity was when it first was initiated, so to speak. And so even that word itself, Christianity, there was no word for Christianity back then. And this is
No.
another interesting side note. Historically speaking, the early gospels and the people that were practicing Christianity in the days, like in the first couple centuries of the past 2,000 years, were translated in Greek. So the language and the stories and the linguistics and the words, they tend to have different kinds of meanings than what we would consider them to be. So Christianity, when it came about, essentially was a revolution, a spiritual revolution that was taking place. And now you have to think, if you put yourself into the shoes of an average like Roman person back during those times, religion and state, like I said before, those were completely combined. Like the government was enacting these different beliefs, and there were different cults, so to speak. And that's an interesting thing too, is what's the difference between a religion and a cult? And I forgot who said this, but the only difference between a religion and a cult is that a cult has a charismatic leader who spreads a message, and then a religion, it's that guy is dead. So there's this proliferation of ideas that's going on. But in the Roman days, you had all sorts of different cults and belief systems and religious practices that were going on. You had the cult of Mithras. You had the worship of these different Roman deities like Jupiter and Saturn, which were older stories that go back to ancient Greece, that were talking about things like Zeus and Poseidon and stuff like that. So there was a long history of believing in these gods and these rituals and sacrifice and offering to nature. And there were nature gods, and there were all these different gods and different ways to worship and to be part of that community. And when Christianity came about, or when what I would call proto-Christianity came about in the early days, I think from what I've researched and read about, is that it was really, like I said, a revolution of the spirit, because there were so many different ways and to be involved spiritually, and oftentimes to participate and to be connected to God or the Creator, you had to go to a very special temple, and there were class systems involved, and not everybody really had access to get to heaven. And since that was the whole idea was that we want to have this divine inspiration to be connected to nature, these things were almost exclusive in a lot of these different cults, and you had to be initiated, and you had to, a lot of times you couldn't be, women were not allowed to be involved in these ceremonies and rituals, and you had to be a soldier for this, or you had to go to a certain time of the year at a certain temple. This is when you can have your experience with God, and all other times it's like you're kind of on your own. Money was involved, how much taxes you had to pay. Like, okay, well, this is something that continued even to this day. It's like, okay, well, the more money I invest in my religion, then that makes me a better person. These were ideas that were going around back during those times. And Christianity, when it first came about, and Jesus, or another name that is commonly referred to as Jesus, is Yeshua ben Hur. And it's like, that's another thing too. It's like the word Jesus. Was there a guy walking around named Jesus back during those days? Well, probably. I mean, yeah, but the name, there weren't even like the letter J, and it's like the consonants didn't even exist. So it's funny how we kind of tie ourselves up into these words. And then when you start to break it down, you start to see, okay, well, what do these things actually mean? And they don't actually mean what we think they mean anymore. So there's this whole story about Yeshua, or Jesus, basically in a nutshell, taking something that was exclusive and very reserved for specific people and specific times, and there was like all of these steps you had to do, kind of like a pyramid scheme in today's world. In order to get to the divine connection with God, you had to go through all these steps. And Jesus was showing up saying, well, no, you don't need to go through all these steps. You don't need to go through that middleman, like you talked about, this authority figure. Oh, there is, it's like this like revolutionary concept that everyone has a divine connection to God, period. And that was something that I think was so appealing about the early versions of Christianity was saying, like, because all these people had a need, they wanted to get there, but they just didn't believe they had access. And a very similar parallel when it comes to today's world with something in America like healthcare, for example. Everyone wants healthcare, but they have all of these steps they have to go through to get it, and oftentimes they can't get it because of all the institutions that are in place. So Jesus, or Yeshua, Ben Hur, whatever you want to call him, was telling us stories and unraveling these belief systems, so much so that gave people access. Well, you don't have to go to that special temple on a special time of day to be connected to God. You could be connected to God right now. And an interesting thing about Christianity in the beginning, one of the many interesting things, is that the ones that he appealed to the most were women. In fact, women were held in high authority, so to speak, in early Christianity, because women are connected to nature in ways that men are not. Women know about the herbs, and they know about medicines, and kind of like what we consider to be early science. Women were the ones that were receptive to this idea much more often. And then, like, fast forward to now, or maybe not right now, but like maybe 1,000 years, in the year 1000, where you have the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and stuff. They were burning women at the stake. The church, the Roman Catholic Church, was literally burning women at the stake because of the fear of their ability to connect with nature, and they were like considered witches. So just within a very short amount of time, this revolutionary concept of everyone has a connection to God rose up. But then you have this authority position of the Roman Empire that eventually, within a couple hundred years, saw that there were so many people that were just basically not participating in the old cults of the day, and they were doing their Christian prayer and love and all of this stuff at home. So eventually there was this act to bring, okay, well, we need to unite all of Roman people under one common religion, and that became what we know now as the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church. This was the most unholy alliance of spirit and government that I think ever really took place in modern history. So I think just one of the things that makes it so interesting to me is that Christianity is not, we honestly have very little awareness about what Christianity actually was. And it's like this prevailing concept. Everything you know about Christianity is completely distorted. And like you said, most likely deliberately. I mean, absolutely deliberately. Because there's this idea, well, if people can connect to God and connect to the Creator and have this divine experience, which is something I also want to touch on later. It's like, what is this Eucharist? What was this really central idea and practice of Christianity, of the Eucharist and of the sacraments, and of, here, drink this wine and you will have a divine experience of God, or eat this and you will the body of Christ and be connected to God. Like, what are these things? I want to get into that later too. But if you have a bunch of people that are basically freely connecting to God and don't have to depend on the state, that is absolutely antithetical to their mission as a government, to control and moderate the people. So, like, all of the gospels that were circulating around during the early days of Christianity, which there were a lot of them, it was sort of an underground cult that was against the state of the Roman Empire. Eventually, when it became syndicated, books were chosen. Gospels were chosen to be part of what we would consider today as the New Testament. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there. There's no doubt about it. However, there was a lot of deliberate omission of gospels, stories, and traditions, characters within the storylines that told us this idea of humanity and direct connection to God. So as much as there's this message of love and unconditional love and every forgiveness, treat your neighbor as you wish you would be treated yourself in there, there's also a lot of stuff that kind of reinforces this old world that Christianity rose out of in the first place, which was this authoritarian top-down, and I think it's best demonstrated in this concept of heaven and hell. There's the ones that go to heaven and there's the ones that go to hell. There's this duality. I don't think Christianity, essentially, when it came about, was talking about a duality at all. That's just kind of a continuance of this old world of separating people. So anyway, there's a lot of really interesting stuff about Christianity, especially, that really captured my imagination. Like, oh my God, you know, when I was a kid and going to Roman Catholic Church, they were telling me my dad was going to hell because he was Jewish. And if your dad doesn't accept Jesus as his one and only savior, then he's going to hell. So you better go get your dad to come to church. And that was one of the things that made me think, well, that doesn't make any sense to me on a very deep level. If Christianity is about love and forgiveness, why are we treating people like this? You know, it's I really came to blow my mind that Christianity was actually way cooler than I thought it was. You know, what we consider to be Christianity today is not what it was back then. And back then it was a revolution of spirit. It was saying, hey, everybody has a connection to God, and you don't have to depend on that authority figure. And that is a part of the reason why there was all of this effort to stop his message in the early beginning. You know, if it was such a threat, and if it was such a minor cult, then why was it such a threat to the Romans? And I think the Roman Empire, they knew on some fundamental level, which maybe you could talk a little bit about as well, is what was Jesus and the man of Jesus? What was so threatening? How is he such a threat to the authority at the time?
Well, I think you kind of pointed it out already. You know, it's the self-governance. Yeah, I think in the whole grand scheme of thing, if you like really think about it, hell never was mentioned in the Bible. Like, hell as we perceive it and how we talk about it, like you either go to God, heaven, or you go to hell. Jesus never spoke about it in that way. Hell was never mentioned the way we perceive it. If there was, like in the original Hebrew Bible, if there was like a mention of hell, I think the literal translation would be more like an abyss or a grave or an absence of God. And I think that's what hell is. You know, while we're on earth, we either live in heaven or we live in hell. We are the makers of our own hell, you know. And the same thing with this hell, and reincarnation is a big one, and as well as taking the power away from the women, I think is a crucial point that we need to talk about too. If you instill fear into people with a belief into hell, and you take away the knowledge about reincarnation, you have them struggling and frantically running around like chickens with their head cut off for a whole life. You know, you can mold people into what society you want by fear and by those things like the fear of death. And even like if you look in the Bible, there is an instance where Jesus and his disciples come upon the sick child. And I forgot which disciple it was. But he asked Jesus, who was it that sinned? Was it the newborn or was it its mother? And we also have to take in consideration, the Bible has been rewritten numerous times, as you mentioned. You know, things have been deliberately taken out, and for what purpose is still to be discovered. But I still think it's to have a society that is easily molded and steered in the direction that you want to steer them in. But if you look at this passage, if you would think there's a newborn baby that has health issues, and the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned? Was it the newborn or was it the mother? Critical thinking kind of would kick in maybe, and you would think, how could a newborn baby sin, right? A newborn baby is at the whims of its mother. Like, all a newborn baby wants is to get milk, it cries, it wants to be taken care of. So when was there time for this baby to sin? So this could kind of, and there's other passages in it, but we don't need to go too deep into this subject, you know. But that could make you kind of think, maybe they were talking about reincarnation here, you know? And I mean, reincarnation is not the excuse for a human being to just live a life however he wants to be, because the human being would know, hey, I come back again to relearn my lessons or to correct things. But I feel like the concept of hell was instilled in us so much that we almost become obedient good slaves, and then the concept of reincarnation does give us a little bit of freedom, to make mistakes, but we also have the freedom to make mistakes and then correct them in this life, just because we all, when we were younger, most of us had a period in our lives where we made grave mistakes and hurt people. That doesn't necessarily we are condemned forever. We can make up for our mistakes. We can find our heaven on earth again and work towards bringing this heaven to other people.
Can I add something to that just
absolutely.
came to mind too? There's the concept of sin. When we think of sin, it's in the framework of, again, this polarity duality of right and wrong. Sins are wrong. There's a sinner. They made like, there's even in the Roman Catholic Church, there's the mortal sins. There's certain sins that are like unforgivable, or if you want to do penance for them, it's like, well, just spend the rest of your life saying the Hail Mary and hope for the best, but you're kind of damned when it comes to that. But in the term sin, when you start to look at earlier etymology of that word, it doesn't actually mean what we think it means, and it actually means something more akin to missing your mark. So if you imagine like the game of playing darts, and you've got the target, and imagine that as your best case action in life to provide love and service to yourself and your community and all that great stuff, best action you can make, like target. Well, when you play darts, and if you don't hit that target, by that original definition of a sin, it's like, okay, I sinned, I missed my mark. But in the world today, and a lot of and really like the several hundred years after Christianity came about and Roman Catholic Church co-opted all of this stuff and changed the definitions and got people into that tunnel vision way of seeing things, of fear, sin and missing your mark became like, okay, well, if you don't hit the bullseye right now, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
I mean, like, imagine playing that kind of game of darts. It's like, you didn't get the bullseye. All right, we're going to just throw you into a fire pit right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is so not how you play darts.
No. And if you look at like God as all loving, all encompassing, perfect being. And this is one thing that I thought about lots when I was a young man, when I was a child, and, that period when we had to go to church. How come an all-loving God, an all-caring God, would put some people on earth very fortunate and some people very unfortunate? How come some, like even with my son Noah, how come he had issues as a baby when he was in the belly, and even after birth with his kidney infection that he almost died? How come we're not all born healthy and happy? Because it said we are made in his image. So how come all those sometimes grave, huge differences? And the only explanation that we really truly can come up with, if you think about it, is the law of reincarnation. That we come back, experience other lifetimes with inflictions or no inflictions, because every moment in our lives, we're not just working towards our future, like there is a thing that we say, if you live a good life, like today, we prepare for tomorrow. That's why they say it's really important, like your thoughts before you go to bed, and what you're thinking about, what you're feeling before you fall asleep, because it will influence how you wake up the next day. But who is to say that the way we live our life will not influence the next one? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. An all-loving God that cares so much for us wouldn't send us down here, some strong and born into wealthy families, and some born really poor. Because I think,
why is there even poverty at all under that idea? That's just something people think about all the time, and in a lot of ways can turn people who are religious and following all of the quote unquote rules, something tragic happens in their life. This conundrum gets people to completely just throw away any sense of, well, there is no God, there is no spirit. It's like, if there was a God, this wouldn't have happened. Therefore, I'm throwing all the way. It's either all or nothing with a lot of people. And that's because that's just part of the programming we've had for so long. It's in the fear of this.
What better way would there be to learn what suffering is? Like, let's say in a life, you were a really horrible person, you instilled a lot of suffering into people and you had no remorse. What better way to learn how it feels, what you did to other people, if you would have to come back, or you chose to come back, you know? Even Cree spirituality, they say you sit with the creator at the beginning of your life and you look at all possibilities and you say, this is what I want to experience this time. And then you will come down and experiencing it. You know, I feel like for me personally, the law of karma and reincarnation makes absolute sense. Otherwise, if you throw this out the window, it would be absolute chaos. It would be unfair advantages that make
and ironically cause and effect. You can look at that as a scientific principle. That's a hermetic principle that, as you know, as much as people again like to separate science and religion, there are so many connections to that. And that's one of the missing elements that absolutely in Christianity was something I believe was absolutely a huge part of it. That was a huge part of the teaching in Christianity in the early days, was reincarnation. You can see even in the Bible, there was that chapter of a huge missing chunk of Jesus's life where he was like a young child, and then it like cuts to 30 years later, and it's like the formative years of his life, and we're left out. And I'm sure we could talk too about just a lot of these things that he learned in this journey throughout initiations and traveling the world and learning about all of these deeper, what we would consider esoteric things that were exclusive to this kind of initiation class. Jesus shows up and is basically just disclosing all of this stuff to people through parables, things that were exclusive understandings that you had to go through, like what we would consider like education for a really long time. He was able to communicate these things in a way that people could understand or start to kind of come to their own understanding. And reincarnation was a huge part of Christianity. A lot of Christians today would probably be like, that's nothing to do with Christianity, but it's fundamental. It's fundamental to that. And everyone believed in it back then. I mean, that was not an unknown concept back then.
Oh no, and like there's like this, I don't even believe that chapter is lost. Like if you would go to the forbidden archives underneath the Vatican, where actually no human beings have access to, you probably would find what happened.
Probably.
You know, it's just a fact that there is a humongous library with thousands upon thousands of books that we know exists, but nobody has access to, should make you think.
Yep, and that's with the famous burning of the Library of Alexandria. And if anyone looks into that, it was like this big catastrophic moment in history where all of this ancient literature and wisdom from thousands of years before that burning just went up in flames. Like, oh, we lost all the knowledge. But there's a story, if you look into it, that was a deliberate attempt to steal the knowledge from Egypt, where all of this stuff was collected over thousands of years, and relocate it to where the Vatican is. So when the building burned up, the documents that burned up were essentially like the tax records and all of the things that were trivial paperwork. And that way the authority at the time can say, oh, well, looks like the knowledge is lost. But then that gave them the upper hand to secretly covet the knowledge and keep it to themselves, because that's the whole thing to remember too in this story, is that knowledge is power. And if you have knowledge about who we are, where we came from, the way that life works, and you can keep that to yourself, you have power over other people. And that's really what the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire, and even to this day at the Vatican, that's their game, is to covet the knowledge.
Yeah, and like, you know, just if we go by example, the last 2 years, they have drilled it so much into people that the unvaccinated are like disease carriers and they're not worthy human beings. And you already saw within 2 years how people turned on each other. Now think about like 2000 years after Jesus's death, because they corrupted the message. the crusade would have never happened if they really understood what the message is, because love thy neighbor as thyself definitely doesn't mean go kill all Muslim people just because I don't know what got into you. Residential schools would have never happened. The whole genocide of the indigenous people would have never happened, you know? And on one part, again, it put people against each other. So now if you just say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, I'm a Christian, some people would say, how can you be a Christian? Look what they have done under the instruction of your God, which is baloney, because no God would ever instruct anybody to kill somebody or to...
Yeah, no God in the sense of what we are talking about here in like the New Testament, this idea of unconditional love and the creator and this force, kind of like from Star Wars, the idea of the force that binds everything together. That's that's God for this. But back then, when we convolute these terms of that God, and then you get these like you brought up before, there was the Old Testament vengeful God, you know, obey me or I'll smite you God,
yeah,
who's always jealous and seems to have very human characteristics compared to the God of the New Testament. And we're kind of mishmash in our minds thinking, oh, well, that's all the same thing. And absolutely is not. There's a whole that's just the mythology of all of this stuff shows you that there was just a complete misunderstanding of real events that were going on, and authority figures that took that power out of control and then were like considered to be gods. But all these terms get thrown together, and it's absolutely all about control. And that's why, like you were saying, like, why, if it was really the way we are told it was, then why are all these things happening? Well, maybe it's because the original message got distorted, deliberately slandered, things left out. And now we are left with a legacy of, you know, you walk into a Catholic church and there's this very horrifying image, frankly, of a guy nailed up on a cross suffering, you know, and think of the movie The Passion of the Christ. It's like just the fear and the pain. And it's like, that is not what Christianity was in the beginning.
No, like, you know, even when I spoke to Leonard, like the Cree elder that is very dear to me, I asked him once, well, what can I do to come closer to the Creator? And he said, the main thing, Steve, is how do you live your life? And, you know, like in a nutshell, again, that is what a good Christian would do. You know, are we of service? Do we just serve ourselves, or do we serve other human beings? Are we an instrument in Creator's hands? Are we kind? Are we gentle? Are we uplifting? Are we here to lend a helping hand if somebody needs us? Or do we just think about ourselves? You know, like, I truly believe, and it sounds easier than it is, but it is also, it's simple. I think we make it more complicated. You know, to be a good, decent human being is very simple. I think we're inherently born to be good, decent human beings. But I think we make it too complicated. You know, we give too much of our responsibility to a remarkable human being that died 2,000 years ago. And, you know, how he died is up to debate too. I mean, we don't have much time anymore. Probably 10 more minutes.
Just say it how it is. Just drop the truth right now. What really happened?
Who knows what really happened?
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, like if you look at the virgin birth, this in itself could have been used to deceive us. Virgin can also, in a greater sense, mean highly evolved and pure. You know, it was no secret that Joseph and Mary were highly evolved human beings. Joseph was a priest, and I think Maria also was involved in very spiritual practices. So if you would take two human beings who never in their life committed a sin, so to speak, who always had good thoughts and good feelings and were generally pure, loving human beings, then those two human beings, when they would have made love to each other, they would have vibrated in such a vibration that it could have attracted the spirit of Jesus. Because sex, okay, you know, if we have sex with each other, it's not just our bodies intermingling with each other. Sex is actually happening on different worlds that we cannot even conceive. So if we have sex with a partner that is kind and loving, and we are kind and loving, we attract angels, so to speak. But if we, so that's why I think people say to make love to each other, you know, you do it in love. But then you also have sexual acts where people maybe be drunk, it's done not in a good way, and the thoughts are not very pure. We could say we attract demons during such an act of intimacy. So in my humble opinion, and there is a spiritual master in Bulgaria, Amram Mikhail Ivanov, who spoke about this in detail. That was the virgin birth. It was not that God impregnated some poor woman who had no clue what was happening, but it was.
You get canceled for something like that today, dude.
Yeah, I could be absolutely wrong, and that is okay. But we all need to start really putting our thinking caps on, you know. And again, this means taking our power back. So if you really would live a pure, that's the foundation, is purity. You know, it's not just the food we eat or the stuff we drink. It's also what thoughts do we consume? What thoughts do we send out? What are our feelings? Are they divine or are they of a lower vibration? And that's what I mean. So people, you can be mad with me or whatever, like you need to do, that is okay. I'm just putting out ideas here. And let's see, like, can we respect other people's ideas or not? But let's think about it. The virgin birth could be that two highly evolved beings were in union that was from such a purity level that they were able to attract the spirit of Jesus. And then the same with, you know, the 30 years that were missing. And then later on in the Bible, there's a lot of instances, let's say when they stoned that lady, I forgot, like
Mary Magdalene.
No, there was another instances where like
people were stoning.
Yeah, they got stoned left,
right,
right, and center. But I think there was a lady who committed adultery or something, and they were stoning her. And it says in the Bible that Jesus came and he painted symbols into the sand. But that's the extent of what they tell you to those symbols. And I think there was one or two other instances where they talk about Jesus painting into the sand before he did something. So either he was really into doodling, or so obviously Jesus was Jewish. The Jewish at that time were Kabbalists. It's not far-fetched to assume that Jesus, in the 30 years where he learned from all different initiations and cultures, that he also was initiated into the practical Kabbalah. And the symbols he may painted into the sand were Kabbalistic symbols, which some people would assume is magic.
But it's a science. It's one of those technologies that
it's occult science.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So what if Jesus was a rabbi, a Kabbalist, an occultist, and with help of the symbols and other things he learned, was able to influence nature, his surroundings, and do God's work that way?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Imagine that. I mean, that's really what is so cool about when you take the time to really look into what Christianity was in the early days. It's a rabbit hole of complete mind-blowing stuff of all of this information. I mean, there's even the image of Jesus being born in a manger. There's stories that talk about a different way that he was born. Like, was he born in a manger? You know, are these stories also, are they talking about real events? We see our mind wants to make a decision. It's like, are they talking about real events, or is this some sort of astrological mythology going on in here? And there's that documentary and storyline of Zeitgeist where they propose this idea that Jesus never actually existed, and they show all of these other worldly spiritual leaders going back thousands of years even before that, like Dionysus and Mithras and more, a lot more of them. And you see that there's all of these astrological connections, like Jesus had 12 disciples, and there's 12 signs of the zodiac, and you know, there's the being put up on the cross, dying, and 3 days later coming back, and there's all these astrological connections, and your mind wants to make a decision, like that documentary would have you say, well, it's like, well, he didn't really exist, there was just all this mythological stuff going on. But again, part of my worldview is that maybe it's not a choice between which one is it. Maybe there's a combination of the two going on. And a lot of these occult sciences and initiation practices were about taking this hermetic concept of as above, so below, and embodying these greater truths within our daily lives and making practice. And there's that saying that's even in the Our Father prayer, which is, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and bringing heaven to earth, taking these deeper concepts and making them real practices. And the idea of Jesus being born in a manger, it's, I mean, on one hand, that's a story, it's like, hey, he's a man of the people, right? You know, it's as opposed to being born in a wealthy, like, we don't imagine Jesus being a wealthy guy, you know, but there's a lot of interesting stories about how he actually was part of a lineage of royalty on earth, and all of these initiations and stuff. So I remember even reading, there's a book for anyone that wants to look into some of this stuff. There's a really great book. It's called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And it was compiled, I think it was back in the 70s. And it's actually the book that the Da Vinci Code, which is much more popular of a story, was based off of. But it talks about this idea that Jesus was a real person and was married. Like you mentioned, rabbis tend to get married. That's part of the deal. And that Mary Magdalene was not this prostitute who was a scarlet and was unclean. She was actually of royalty too, and that she was initiated into all this stuff. So Jesus being this godly figure, it's like, maybe that's our memory of it now. But the more I've looked into it, and we've discussed over time, is that, you know, maybe he comes from a lineage of priest, king, teachers. And it's not, he wasn't just a teacher who necessarily showed up with all the wisdom. Granted, he definitely had the vessel for it, like you alluded to, being the product of, you know, a more of a philosophical, like, deeper virgin birth, essentially. But also maybe he was part of a lineage of being groomed to be a priest king, so to speak. And that was part of one of the interesting things, I think, was that, you know, being a priest king implies there's that authority figure. But to me, Jesus was one of the most important revolutionaries on the planet, because even though he may have been, and of course, I don't know, I mean, just, this is all stuff I've read and stuff I feel. So you know, who knows, take it for what you will and look down this stuff yourself. But maybe, as someone who was being groomed to have this position of authority, flew in the face of that and said, no, well, like, I don't want to be the king of, you know, the king of the people. I want to give people the understanding that they are absolutely connected on their own, that there's this community of light. And that's like that whole concept of Christ consciousness too, is that when you put all the people together in a concept of unity and divine unity, that's where you get this white light coming in. So, you know, jumping around on all sorts of different subjects here, but it's just an interesting story to think of how Jesus was a man who had knowledge and initiation and awareness and education into all of these amazing things that have been coveted in secret for such a long time, and brought it to the people, you know?
Yeah. And you know, the thing is, like they say, you never pour a good wine into a dirty glass. And that's kind of what I alluded to. Like, if this spirit that in his incarnation, where he was able to receive the Holy Spirit, was Christ, Jesus, Jeshua, then he worked towards that through numerous reincarnations, perfecting himself, so that this whole foundation of his life was purity. And we all can do that, you know? We all have the powers to work on ourselves today, tomorrow, each and every day, and over lifetimes. And that's what I feel. You know, you kind of, we also, you brought it up, as above, so below, you know? And if we look at the living book of nature, even a raindrop, It falls from the sky, it evaporates, it goes up into the sky again, where it moves with the clouds till it falls again. Everything in nature, spring, summer, fall, winter, the cycle continues. Why would be human life the one thing that stands out, that is absolutely contrary to everything in nature? Everything dies and is reborn. Why would be human beings different, you know? Why? Again, I think it has to do with control, and they don't want us to realize the full power there is. You know, even if you look at the Jacob's ladder, it has 33 steps. We have 33 vertebrae. And the 12 disciples could be the 12 cranial nerves. We spoke about the city of Jerusalem with the 12 gates, and how we have 12 gates in a previous podcast. Our body, you know, our ears, our eyes, our holes in the nose, our mouth, our nipples, our belly button, and then the 2 holes we have lower down in the nether regions. And again, you know, like to kind of close this off, if you look at first, Jesus performed miracles, and he said we can perform miracles as well. The only people at this point in time that I know that are performing miracles are the medicine people who live on Turtle Island. And there's quite a few that would would see what they do with the help of the spirits, the helpers. It's a miracle. There's no other way of perceiving what is happening in those ceremonies. You know, our rational mind might try to make sense out of it, but ultimately it's a miracle. What happened with Noah, that he's alive today, is an absolute miracle by the grace of God, you know. But Christianity that came here and colonized the indigenous people of this beautiful land, they even drilled it into them so hard that there's so many communities that would chastise their own medicine people, saying it's the devil's work, it's blasphemy. But who is to say? Those things are done in a good way. They're done with the best interest of the people at heart.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where you see the whole agenda. We're so quick to demonize people who think to themselves, people who have lived such a good life that with the help of the spirits, they could perform miracles and help people. But we would rather say this is the work of the devil than to acknowledge, wow, this man did so much work on himself, learned the ancient ways that God and the helpers can work through him. You know, I have to acknowledge it's not the person that does the healing and does the miracles. It's God. It's the spirits. Really? But I think it's been 2,000 years drilling into the people that if you perform miracles, how dare you? You must be working for the devil. And I think that is the greatest problem we have here. You know, it's so contrary to the original message. We're so easy to demonize, to judge, to condemn, to chastise things that we don't understand, you know. And I don't say don't pray to Jesus. I pray to Jesus. I have, and that's wrong in Christian people's eyes again too. I have a tattoo of his likeness. I don't know how he looked like, but I put it here so I'm always reminded that I want to strive to live a decent life, you know. I know I probably in this lifetime will never get anywhere close to where Jesus was, but it's a reminder to work on myself, to be a loving, caring human being, and to work for God. And I think that's the most important thing we need to remember. We are all sons and daughters of God. We might be on another evolutionary level than Jesus was, but that doesn't take away from the fact that we're all God's children, you know, that we're all sacred and that we all could perform miracles.
And we do a lot of the time. We just have a misunderstanding of what miracles are. I mean, the miracle of life and miracles are happening all the time. And like you said before, it's much more simple than, you know, we kind of chalk it up to be sometimes. And that's a beautiful thing. I mean, there's the miracles of like bringing people back from the dead, or which also is interesting stories about what did that actually mean. But then there's other miracles that happen all the time, and it's just we all have that ability, and it's not something that we have to wait for. It's something that we do and it can embody right now, and it's more needed now than ever. Yeah. And one thing I want to say just before we close up here, because we're at our hour, is
Yeah.
is about gnosis. And that's a Greek word that represents knowledge, but it's also not knowledge per se like we think of it. It's more of a, to put some other words together to understand what gnosis really is, it's about an integrated, informed knowledge that is within. And there's this idea of the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is kind of like information in that sense, but wisdom is that integrated, internalized, practical application of that knowledge. So there's wisdom and knowledge, and the balance of these two is what I think really what gnosis is. And gnosis is the way that happens only from within. Nobody can tell you or give you gnosis. Gnosis is something that emerges from you when you have this divine insight and this connection to God or the creator or whatever you want to associate and label as that.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think when you start to look down at what Christianity was all about in the beginning, was about exactly that. It's about this gnosis. It's about living that wisdom and having knowledge. You know, knowledge and wisdom go together. And in a world today where knowledge and information and censorship and all of this taking of information, there's one source official narrative and everything else is complete nonsense. That was what Christianity emerged from, was a world where it was like there's the one source and there's this information, this is how you live your life and this is how you get to heaven. And then a new way comes about that says, hey, no, there's actually not one source. If there was one source, you have it and no one can take it away from you. You are born with it and you have this ability to connect to God and the creator and all that. So it's something that it takes some pondering, some research, and some maybe some forgiveness in your understanding, because we all have programs, understandings of what these things are, and fear governs a lot of our programming, unfortunately, today. But you can change that unfortunate sense and say, no, maybe there's a purpose to the misunderstandings and the misprogrammings to help us, encourage us to learn ourselves and to take that initiative ourselves, because no one's going to tell you, what God is. They'll give you information, but you're going to find it within yourself. And that's really what I think one of the core messages of Christianity really is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think next podcast we should talk a little bit more about the power that women have in changing the world, and how it deliberately was erased from the Bible, and why women are demonized so much.
Yeah. And
because they are the key. They are the key to our future,
Absolutely. That's what it's all about. And so I think, this podcast really just opened up a floodgate of all sorts of stuff, because in the early form of Christianity, and what Christianity really is all about, it applies and connects to so many things that are extremely relevant for today's world and to remember and to understand. So let's do that. Let's talk about the power of women. If there was ever an authority figure on earth living, walking around,
it would be women.
pretty damn close. Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, and for everyone that's watched and listened to this point and following and liking and subscribing. We really appreciate you. And just want to thank you. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And again, I feel like it's important to kind of voice that we're sharing thoughts and ideas, and there's no harm meant. We're definitely not an authority figure on Jesus and his life. It is more meant to just, maybe see some aspects of the story that could have been missed or deliberately taken out. But it's all done in a good way,
Yeah.
More so to give people the power back that they inherently had all this time.
Yeah, and the freedom to have these discussions right now, because 1,000 years ago, if we were talking about this and the wrong person heard it, we would have been murdered for it.
Oh yeah, but it could also be in the near future.
Exactly, in the near future too. So this is just a really important time to be able to freely discuss ideas in a good way, as you said. So thank you. Yes, absolutely.
And I can't speak for you, but I have a very deep love for Creator and for Jesus and for Christ. And
me too.
Yeah,
me too. Absolutely. And it's like, forgive us our trespasses. I mean, these are stories and phrases that live deeply within me. I mean, in my programming as well, growing up, and there's, I think when you get down to the core message of it, and it's really about respecting people's beliefs as well, you know, and we have no intention to go and forcibly show people the truth, because we don't have the truth, you know. No one has the truth. And that's, I think, what is important to leave on, is that we come with respect. Forgive us our trespasses. and
Exactly.
thank you for sharing, and listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex, and everybody else. We love you.
Love you. Peace, guys.
Ciao.